In February of 2016, someone ordered close to $1 billion out of Bangladesh's central bank, and for hours the bank's own systems reported that nothing was wrong. The attackers had not broken any cryptography. The payment messages were genuine. Investigators found something stranger. They had changed just 2 bytes of running software, enough to make the bank's records lie about the money leaving. How could 2 bytes hide a theft that large? The truth leaves a paper trail. Let's follow it. Findings of fact. This is the story of the Bangladesh Bank cyber heist of February 2016. Attackers broke into the Central Bank of Bangladesh in Dhaka and used its own connection to the global payment network to try to steal close to $1 billion held at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It matters because the thieves did not defeat the bank's cryptography. They defeated its ability to know the truth about its own records. We will trace how a year of quiet intrusion led to 2 altered bytes, a silenced confirmation, and a lesson the whole banking industry had to absorb: the gateway. To understand what failed, you first have to understand how banks move money across borders, because almost nothing about it works the way people imagine. Banks do not physically ship cash to one another. Instead, they send messages. A global cooperative called SWIFT runs the messaging network that banks trust for this purpose. When a bank wants to move money, it sends a SWIFT message, which is, in effect, a signed instruction. Pay this amount from this account to that account, and route it through these named intermediary banks along the way. That last part matters. 2 banks on opposite sides of the world usually have no direct relationship. So a payment travels through a chain of what are called correspondent banks, each of which holds accounts on behalf of the others and passes the money along one link at a time. A single international transfer might touch 3 or 4 institutions before it lands. Every one of them expects the message to be complete and correctly formatted, with the right codes identifying each bank in the chain. Leave out a required field, and a bank down the line will simply reject it. Bangladesh Bank connected to the SWIFT network through a piece of software called Alliance Access. Think of Alliance Access as the bank's own gateway. It sat on the bank's own computers, inside the bank's own building. Its job was to translate the bank's instructions into properly formatted SWIFT messages, to send and receive them, and to keep a faithful local record of everything that passed through. Behind the gateway sat a database that stored that official record, and, wired to it, a printer that produced a confirmation for each and every transaction. 2 facts about this design will decide the entire story. First, the gateway lived inside the bank, on machines the bank managed, which meant its security was largely the bank's own responsibility, not something SWIFT could guarantee from the outside. Second, the whole system rested on a quiet assumption that if a false instruction ever slipped through, the local record and the printed confirmation would let a human being catch it afterward. The database and the printer were the safety net beneath the high wire. The attackers understood both of those facts completely, and so they made a choice that separates this heist from an ordinary theft. They did not try to defeat the front door. They set out to defeat the safety net. A year in the walls? The break-in did not happen on the night of the theft. It began more than a year earlier, and it began, as so many intrusions do, with email. According to the criminal complaint filed by the United States Department of Justice, the operation opened with online reconnaissance in October of 2014. The attackers researched specific banks in Bangladesh, visited their websites, and studied the people who worked there. Then, through 2015, employees at Bangladesh Bank began receiving messages that looked like job applications. Each one was polite and unremarkable. The sender said they were excited about the idea of joining the company, and that here was their resume and cover letter, with a link to download it. The link did not lead to a resume. It led to malware, Forensic analysis later showed that at least 3 bank computers tried to download that malicious file in early 2015, and that the users of 2 of them were exactly the people to whom the fake applications had been sent. The bait had worked. From that first foothold, the intruders did not rush. This is the discipline that marks a professional operation. By March of 2015, investigators found they had moved deeper into the network and planted a hidden backdoor. That backdoor was built to disguise its own communications, so they looked like ordinary encrypted web traffic. Security tools tend to leave encrypted traffic alone, on the assumption that they cannot read it anyway. Investigators call this technique fake transport layer security. The whole point was to hide in plain sight and to trip no alarms. For nearly a year, the attackers lived quietly inside the bank's network. They mapped it. They learnt where the valuable systems were and how the bank's routines worked, and they waited. Then, in the last days of January 2016, they made their move toward the one machine that mattered above all others, the computer that ran the SWIFT gateway, the bank's door to the global payment network. To reach it, the record shows, they moved from machine to machine and at least once fumbled, trying to log in with a credential that belonged to an entirely different victim in South America that the same group was attacking at the same time. Even careful operators leave fingerprints when they are running more than one job at once. 2 bytes. Here is the heart of it. If you take away one idea from this episode, take this one. When the attackers finally reached the gateway machine, they did not simply send fake payments and hope no one noticed. They installed a custom program built specifically for this bank's software, and it was that program that made the theft possible. Analysts at the British security firm BAE Systems later recovered samples of the toolkit from an online malware repository and reconstructed, step by step, what it did. To follow it, you need one small piece of how a computer thinks. A program is a long list of instructions. Some of those instructions are decisions. The computer compares 2 things, and then it asks a yes or no question, and depending on the answer, it either continues straight ahead or it jumps somewhere else. Programmers call that a conditional jump. It is the machine code version of the word if. Now, the bank's gateway software contained exactly such a decision, sitting inside a loaded code library, acting as a gatekeeper for the transaction database. Before any change could be made to the official record of a payment, the software ran a check. If the check said the change was not allowed, the conditional jump fired, and the software skipped the change and refused. That gate is what kept the record honest. It was, in the words of the later investigation, a check that would ordinarily prevent changes to the database that recorded the bank's payments. The malware's central trick was to change the question the gatekeeper asked. It searched through the running programs on the computer, and whenever it found that particular library loaded into memory, it overwrote just 2 bytes at one specific spot. Those 2 bytes were the conditional jump. In the original software, they told the computer, if the check fails, jump away and stop. The malware replaced them with 2 different bytes that mean simply do nothing. In the trade, the original instruction is called a jump if not 0. The replacement is a pair of no operations. A jump became a shrug. 2 bytes. That was the whole edit. After it, the gatekeeper never refused again. The database was wide open, and the attackers could write to it as if they owned it, and that is exactly what they did. The malware watched the stream of SWIFT messages for the specific transfers the attackers themselves had sent, identified by hidden markers in a configuration file. When it found one, it reached into the now defenseless database and deleted the record of that transfer, and it could adjust the balances the system would report so that the account totals still looked plausible to anyone glancing at them. The Department of Justice made one detail explicit, and it is a mark of real skill. At Bangladesh Bank, the 2-byte edit was applied only to the copy of the software running in the computer's memory. The file sitting on the hard drive was never touched. So if an investigator later pulled up the stored program and examined it, it looked completely normal. The tampering existed only while the machine was running and vanished the moment it was powered down. That is the difference between a smash and grab and a professional job. The thieves did not break the lock. For a few hours, they rewrote the rule that said the lock should hold and then arranged for the rewrite to disappear, silencing the printer. Editing the database was only half of concealment. There was still the printer, and the printer was, in some ways, the harder problem. Remember the safety net. For every payment the gateway handled, it generated a confirmation message and sent that confirmation to be printed. A physical stack of paper confirmations is exactly the kind of thing an alert clerk can read, cross-check, and question the next morning. If the fraudulent transfers printed out plainly alongside the legitimate ones, the entire scheme could unravel in a single afternoon, long before the money could be spirited away. Deleting the digital record was not enough. The paper trail had to be falsified too. So the malware intercepted the confirmations. When a confirmation for one of the fraudulent messages was about to be produced, the software caught it before it reached the printer. It read the message, parsed it, and rewrote its contents to strip out any trace of the fraud. Then it took that doctored version and formatted it into a print file, described in the technical language that printers understand, called printer command language, and specified for a particular hardware model, a Hewlett-Packard LaserJet 400. It handed that clean-looking, falsified copy to the gateway's own legitimate printing utility, so that whatever came out of the machine looked entirely routine. Finally, it overwrote the temporary print files it had created with zeros, so that nothing could be recovered from them afterward. Here is where the cold open comes back. Bank staff would later realize that on that Thursday night, the confirmation system was not behaving as it should. In practice, the printout had gone quiet, but it had not failed. It had been switched off from the inside, deliberately, so that the one control capable of showing a human the truth on paper produced nothing at the moment it was needed most. The toolkit was also built to erase itself and cover its own retreat. Investigators found it had been scheduled to securely delete its own components early on the morning of February the 6th, wiping the evidence clean once the money was safely on its way. But something ordinary intervened. Bank staff shut the server down on the 5th and started it up again on the 6th. Because of that restart, the self-deletion command never fired. The malware was left behind on the machine, stranded and intact. That accident of timing is a large part of the reason investigators could later reconstruct, in such precise detail, exactly what the software had done. The thieves' one piece of bad luck became the world's best evidence: 35 orders. With the records now editable and the printout silenced, the fraudulent instructions went out across the network to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where Bangladesh Bank kept its United States dollar reserves. If you want to steal dollars, that is where the dollars are. There were 35 payment orders. Together they sought close to $1 billion, aimed at accounts in the Philippines and in Sri Lanka. The Fed did not simply pay them, and this is an important point often lost in the retelling. According to reporting by Reuters, the first wave of requests was rejected. The messages were missing information that any legitimate transfer requires, the names of the correspondent banks that would route the money along the chain we described earlier. Without those, the Fed's systems bounced them back. It would have been the perfect moment for the scheme to die. But the attackers understood correspondent banking well enough to fix their mistake. They corrected the formatting, supplied the missing details, and sent the orders again. On the second attempt, the Fed approved 5 of them, and released about $101 million. Why 5 and not 15 or 35? This is where luck walked into the story, twice, wearing no uniform and carrying no security badge. Two entirely ordinary things, neither of them a control anyone had designed for this, stopped the rest. The first was a single word. One of the transfers, for about $20 million, was headed to a non-profit organization in Sri Lanka, whose name included the word foundation. In the payment instruction, that word was misspelled. A routing bank in the chain, Deutsche Bank, noticed the odd spelling and paused to ask Bangladesh Bank to clarify what was meant. That query, over nothing more than a typo, bought precious time, and the Sri Lanka transfer was ultimately stopped and the money returned. Reporting differs on the exact letters of the misspelling. What the sources agree on is that foundation was spelled wrong, and that the error is what tripped the wire. The second lucky break was also a word, and it was pure coincidence. One of the Manila destination addresses contained the name Jupiter. As Reuters reported, Jupiter also happened to be the name of an oil tanker and a shipping company that appeared on a United States sanctions list connected to Iran. That coincidental match triggered extra scrutiny at the Fed, which slowed the processing and helped hold back the far larger requests still waiting in the queue. A street name in Manila collided with a sanctions database, and hundreds of millions of dollars stayed put. Reuters described the outcome bluntly. It was, one source said, a total fluke that the Fed did not pay out the whole $951 million. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. The controls that were supposed to catch this fraud had been carefully, expertly defeated. What actually saved the overwhelming majority of the money was a spelling mistake and an accident of naming. The malware even had the capability, analysts found, to alter the opening and closing balance figures the system reported, so that the account would appear untouched. The attackers had thought of nearly everything. They had not thought of Jupiter, the weekend and the trail. Timing mattered as much as the code, and the attackers had chosen their moment with care. They launched on a Thursday. In Bangladesh, the weekend falls on Friday and Saturday. So as the Federal Reserve's questions began to arrive, the officials who needed to answer them were away from their desks, and the bank's own confirmation path was silent, its messages suppressed. The gap between New York's working week and Dhaka's weekend became a window, and the thieves had timed their operation to open it. By the time bank staff started a backup system that weekend and looked, they discovered dozens of messages from the Fed asking them to reconfirm transfers that added up to nearly $1 billion. By then, the money that had already cleared was long gone. Repeated attempts to reach the Fed over that weekend, by message and by phone, largely went unanswered until it was too late. Where did the money go? The $81 million that reached the Philippines had been sent to 4 accounts at a branch of the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, known as RCBC, on Jupiter Street in Makati City. Those accounts, investigators established, had been opened months earlier, in May of 2015, under fictitious names, and had sat almost untouched, waiting. From there, according to Philippine authorities, and to testimony given at the country's Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearings, the funds were converted from dollars into Philippine pesos through a remittance company and channeled into the casino and junket world, where large sums of cash change hands and become extraordinarily difficult to trace. Much of that money was never recovered. Here the channel must be careful, and deliberately so. Exactly who directed each step of that laundering became the subject of fiercely contested testimony. Witnesses before the Senate committee contradicted one another on who instructed whom, on who was present when cash was handed over, and on how much remained unaccounted for. Several declined to answer questions, citing their right against self-incrimination. The bank's officers denied knowledge of the laundered money. The branch manager described herself as an unwitting scapegoat, a pawn, she said, in a high-stakes chess game played by giants. We are not here to adjudicate that dispute. We report only what official bodies have formally established, and we name individuals only where a court or a regulator has made a finding. The rest we leave as exactly what it is, disputed and unresolved. What actually failed and what changed? So what, in the end, actually failed? It is worth being precise, because the obvious answer is the wrong one. It was not the cryptography. The fraudulent messages were properly authenticated to the network and to the Federal Reserve. They looked genuine for the simple reason that they were sent by software the bank itself trusted and operated. No code was cracked. No secret key was stolen and abused in the way a layperson might picture. What failed was the assumption sitting underneath the entire design, that the record and the confirmation could always be trusted to reveal the truth. The attackers proved that if you can quietly edit the record and doctor the confirmation, then an authenticated system will faithfully, obediently carry out a lie and hand you a clean receipt for it. The official responses followed from that lesson once it was understood. The messaging cooperative, SWIFT, launched what it called its Customer Security Program, built around a framework of controls that member banks must now meet and formally attest to. That framework set out a tier of mandatory controls, backed by a further set of advisory ones. Read the list, and you can see the shadow of this heist in almost every line. Keep the payment environment segregated from the general office network, so an intruder who phishes an ordinary employee cannot simply walk to the gateway. Require more than one factor to log in. Harden the systems and apply security updates. And, pointedly, perform regular integrity checks on the software and on the very database that records transactions. In other words, the controls now begin from the assumption that the record itself can be attacked and demand that banks be able to prove it has not been. That is a direct answer to two flipped bytes. SWIFT also pushed out a mandatory update to the Alliance interface software in 2016, designed to help detect exactly this kind of tampering. The accountability was slower, and much of it is still not finished. In the Philippines, the central bank, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, imposed a record fine of 1 billion pesos on RCBC for its control failures, the largest such penalty it had ever levied. A court in Makati later convicted a bank branch manager on 8 counts of money laundering, sentencing her to years in prison on each count, though she remains free while she appeals. In the United States, the Department of Justice publicly attributed the intrusion to hackers working for a North Korean military intelligence agency, charging one man in 2018 and 2 more in 2021, and describing a wider campaign that sought to steal more than $1.3 billion from victims around the world. None of those men has ever stood trial, and Bangladesh Bank's civil lawsuit in New York, its attempt to recover what it lost, was still being litigated years after the theft, with no final judgment on the merits and its outcome unknown. The enduring point is smaller and harder than any headline about hackers or casinos. A safety net woven from records and printed paper only works if you can be certain that no one has rewritten it. For a few hours in February of 2016, 2 bytes were enough to destroy that certainty inside one of the world's central banks. The task the industry set itself afterward was not to build a stronger lock on the door. It was to be able to prove at any moment that the record kept safely on the inside still tells the truth. This has been Findings of Fact. Thanks for watching. Every source is linked in the description if you want to dig deeper. If we got anything wrong, let us know in the comments. We'll pin the correction. And subscribe so the next investigation finds you. Or keep watching. The next one's on screen now.